For our next presenters, I'm really pleased to welcome Sandra and Matt. Sandra works for Loughborough University and also runs her own consulting firm called Fiery Red as a fellow redhead. I can only say that's a fantastic thing. Matt works at STEM Learning, but we've previously worked together, haven't we, Matt, at Future Learn? So that's been an exciting journey for us both. You're here today to talk about learning technologists as learning designers. Are the two not the same thing? Maybe we'll find out over the next half hour. Sandra and Matt, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon and welcome to everybody. This session on learning design and learning technologists. My name is Sandra Hoskinson and I'm working in partnership with Matt Cornock, and we are aiming to help you do a bit of reflection and CPD this afternoon, looking at the challenges and opportunity presented by this year. We'll be providing a bit of scaffolding, and we're hoping also to do some interaction with you. So fingers crossed this will all work. So one of the biggest challenges this year, as we'll all know, has been the rapid essential move from face-to-face teaching to online teaching. Learning technologists have played a key role in this process as enablers as well as facilitators. It became obvious to Matt and I early on this year that learning design needed to play a role and underpin this process. But the rush to emergency provision, we wondered if this had been missed in the process. So in June of 2020 on Twitter, I got involved in a chat with learning designers and with Leonard, who I'm pleased to say is here today, and Neil Mosley. I'll let you read the quote that sparked this, and then Sue Beckingham actually asked whether and invited me to be involved in a chat about learning design. As Matt and I had already had a discussion about aspects of this, I invited him to join me on this session. So in October, we ran a chat on Twitter in LTHE chat. If you've not seen LTH chat, I encourage you to join one evening. It happens on a Wednesday evening, and in fact, the next session is actually tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. So this presentation came out of that chat, and we thought we'd use it as a springboard to help you reflect on this year. So to get us started, we're going to run a couple of polls, and I'm hoping Maureen is going to actually help us with this now.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, so here's the first one. We're hoping that you'll join in with us.
I'm just going to add all the choices in. So,
okay, great, thank you.
Here we go. Hopefully that you can all see that.
There you go. So map A to 1, B to 2, C to 3, D to 4, and E to 5. How important are learning design theories and models to success in your role?
Okay, and we'll leave that a minute and then we'll have a look at the results.
In order to vote, just click on the number that you want to vote for.
Thank you very much to Marina, who's just spotted that on the slide D and D and B are the same. So let's make D slightly unimportant. Very important at the top to not at all important at the bottom.
Yeah, you get the gist of this, I'm sure. Sorry about that. Thank you, Marina. Okay, how are we doing there, Maren? Do we want to look at the results?
Ooh.
Oh, that's really interesting.
That is very interesting. I like the look of that.
Yeah, so do I.
Screenshot that, quickly save it. Thank you very much.
I'm doing it. That's what I'm doing. All right, on to the next one. Shall we see what else we've got on the next slide? Fingers crossed it'll be written correctly this time. Okay, bear with me. There we go. Oops. There we go. Right, this is our next poll. So we're looking at confidence with this. I have to say, if I've got a new model, I'm actually not very confident about it to start off with. I usually need to try it a couple of times before I'm happy to talk to anybody about it.
Responses are coming in.
Brilliant, thank you. Oh dear.
If everyone puts A, I think we'll just cancel the session, to be honest.
Well, we'll just go home. That's a good idea. I'm in my little dungeon here. Right.
How's our results then? Okay. Thank you very much for your responses. So it's interesting mix there all the way through from with most people sort of somewhat confident, and it's almost like a Gaussian distribution across the rest of them, which is really good. That's the whole purpose of today's session.
Yeah, I have to say I ended up in the middle too. Right, so this is some examples of what we actually found out from our LTH chat, and you'll see tweets from different people on this. It's interesting to look at what other people think, and that's one of the reasons why we were running this session, and we're hoping that you'll join in with the next bit. I'm going to hand over to Matt, who's actually going to take us through a model now and some examples.
Yeah, I mean, those quotes there from the LTH-HE chat really just show the variety of perceptions that learning technologists, learning designers, those working in HE, academics and support staff all felt. And I think for me, there was some nice points about the alignment of what we're doing with technology towards a learning outcome or towards skills development. And this takes place not just at the level of activities, but at the level of modules, at the level of degrees, and at the level of departments and disciplines as well. So those that idea of learning design can be taken at so many different levels. And actually, if you think about one of the formal learning design books, I recommend you read this. James DL and his colleagues define learning design in a capitalized sense, as in like capital L, capital D, as a way of representing and describing a sequence of learning activities and in a transferable way, which you then apply to a specific group of learners. So why am I waffling on about this to you as learning technologists? Because I think it's incredibly important as learning technologists, we have a handle on this because it helps inform our discussions with our colleagues. And importantly, it enables us to ask the question, why? From an informed perspective, and that question of why are we doing something a particular way, why are we recommending a tool, why is a lecturer or an educator approaching us and asking us about a particular approach? Well, for me, learning design is part of that answer, and having a good grip of what learning design is will help you with those discussions. So in terms of what we mean by learning design, well, obviously this year's been a bit different, hasn't it? And that's a great understatement of the year. From emergency learning and teaching, moving towards sustainable learning and teaching in the future, I think learning design's got something to play here. Not only because we've all started, well, certainly I have, and I know looking at some of the presentations today, a lot of our focus this year on emergency learning and teaching has been the tools and the templates. It's not really been about theory. And you know, even when you've got a very simple learning design, so for example, a very basic learning design that I included in an open course that I made for teachers was based on a swim lane model of what the educator, the learner is doing at any point in time and with what resources they need. And that helped those teachers that I was working with about the role and the purpose of both asynchronous and synchronous learning. So just at a very superficial level there, looking at learning design. But we're not going into all the different theories and all the different models that we could have done because there just wasn't enough time. And it's really interesting that normally when we're providing training for colleagues, we, you know, particularly postgraduate certificates in academic practice, for example, we bombard them with a load of theory. But what we really needed this year was tools and templates. But I still think there's a place for models and theories because what we have done is just drawn upon our prior experience, what we know might work, and some simple rules about instructional design, the purpose of asynchronous and synchronous. But some of that might come from learning theories not actually guaranteeing learning. And so learning is, of course, dependent on individual students and what they bring to the party, their experience, their prior knowledge, and their interpretations. And that might be one of the ways is where learning theory and learning models don't really take a lot of precedent when we're putting things together, but they are a useful tool for us as learning technologists as we look back and what we've discovered this year with this online pivot. Because through using models and theories, we can look at the different opportunities that could have been realized when we look at the emergency provision. It'll help us take us to the next level of using learning technologies. It might even provide the proper opportunities to reconceptualize what we mean by technology enhanced learning. But crucially, it allows us a framework that we can start evaluating what's been and gone. And it doesn't really matter what type of model or what type of theory that you use. It might be something like Diana Laurillard's conversational framework. There's another book you should have a look at, Teaching as a Design Science. Diana Laurillard's put into that book there a number of examples where she's applied her conversational framework to different types of activities. And it just shows you can use the same model or theory and apply it to different things as both a design tool and an analysis tool. One of the analysis tools that I picked up when I was doing the OU course on distance learning was this one from Knoll and colleagues, Grania Knoll and colleagues, back in 2004. And I still think it's quite a useful diagnostic tool to position different learning activities. And it's a 3D matrix or at 3 axes, looking at how individual or how social an activity is, how much it's informational transmission or whether it's experimental, whether it's reflective or not reflective. And you can use this as a way of designing activities, but you can also use it as an analytic framework. And you can just plot this on 3 different lines to make it easier to map things out. So I wanted to give you a couple of examples of how you can use this so that when you're looking back with your colleagues as to what's happened and where you might go forward, you might be able to use the same type of tool. So for example, let's take a typical activity of a seminar, and you do reading before, then you do a seminar activity. And if you're translating that online, it might be through Zoom, but it might also be asynchronous. So you might start off with posting well, you have to read the article first, and that's more on the informational side rather than experiential. You might want to post a response to a question. And again, that's probably be more individual activity. You're not really interacting with anyone just by the act of posting something. But when you add another layer to that activity, which is about commenting on someone else, maybe responding to some discussion prompts that have been set by the educator, you're shifting that slightly more along to the social aspect. But we can probably safely say this particular activity is not very reflective. You could adapt it though, depending on whether you're using a small group, which is normally what you'll face in HE or FE, or whether you're applying this type of model to a MOOC, which are the sorts of things that I deal with on FutureLearn. And the technology then starts to shape how you will adapt to that activity. And you can see how those different elements could be adapted based on the choice of technology. So where do you start? Do you start with the technology, or do you start with your learning design and the activity? And no guess is where I want to start. It's definitely with the learning design and the activity. And then using the technology that's going to help me achieve my intended design. Because I'm working towards specific learning outcomes. The technology is going to help me there, rather than starting with the tools. I'm starting with the learning outcomes. So you could adapt this based on technology. You might have a slightly more social ways of interacting if you've got tools that enables you to do that. But you can also adapt the activity to make it more reflective if you're using the article as a framework for reflecting on your own practice. As another example, what about practical experiments in a lab? Well, certainly without COVID, we'd have students in labs doing all sorts of practical experiments, and that's a very experiential way of learning. But in the current climate, we've had to use different things like virtual experiments, or even we could shift that axis down towards the more informational side and have a recording of an experiment being done and data being provided to the students. Now, that's not going to develop their practical lab skills, but it will help them develop their data analysis skills. So it goes again back down to what's the intended learning outcome of this particular activity. And if it is on data analysis, well, it could be either an individual process or something where the results are pooled or analysed together in a social way. It might be reflective if they're reflecting on how they might improve that particular practical experiment. So you can use those types of frameworks to look at an activity and start to look at it from different angles. And with your learning technologies hat on as well, being aware of all the potential ways you could use tools, you can inform the discussions you have with educators by using frameworks like this. Now, what I wanted to ask us now is a little whiteboard activity to see what frameworks and theories you are currently using. And I can see it's great to see that in the text chat already, people are referring to the ABC model from Young and Petrovich, which I use on a regular basis as well when I'm creating MOOCs for professional development teachers. So if you've used ABC, that's great. But what I want you to do is just add on as many different frameworks you can think onto this whiteboard, please, because what I'd like to do at the end of today's session is just make that available for everyone to see. So if there's a way that we can activate that, that's great. So add your thoughts onto here. As many different approaches you can think of. Any more than ABC? Has anyone used Daniel Laurillard's conversational framework?
Yeah, there's lots of ABC there, Matt, isn't there?
Lots of ABC. The three E's from Smythe and there's a university up in Scotland. Its name's I just forgot. Napier. Napier.
Yeah, it's Napier. Yeah, Carpe Diem I recognise as well.
Yeah, Carpe Diem. Have we got the JISC viewpoints, by the way, is the precursor to ABC.
Wow.
That's another one to put in there.
Arena
you know
wow.
The Arena Blended, that's the ABC one, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Community of Inquiry, but Garrison like it. One of the ones that I've actually gone back to, and that's the one I referred to about what I've provided to the teachers in the MOOCs, is all the way back to Moore's transactional model, which, yeah, it's old, but if you're looking at distance learning for the first time, which many people are, just thinking about the interactions between teachers, students, and content, that's a good starting point. I like the adaptation of that by Anderson and Garrison, and particularly Anderson's revised interaction model in 2003 as well. That's quite useful to look at. Think about what interactions are most valuable to learning. Wonderful, folks. I really do thank you very much for sharing all your ideas there. I'm going to make sure I've saved that now before we move on.
Yeah.
Don't want to lose that one. Okay.
There's also some great stuff in the chat as well, so we'll see if we can capture that.
So the reason why I'm asking you all to share these things is because I think as learning technologists, we need to be aware of these different frameworks and models because they do inform our discussions. So let me just share back our slides again. Move us on to the next one. Okay. What I'd like, sorry, I've jumped on your slide, haven't I, Sandra? Over to you.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Matt, go for it.
Okay. So what I was going to say is, as a learning technologist, then you're working as part of a team. You're working with academic staff. You're working with students. You're working with support staff. But what's your role in the learning design process? So either put something into the text chat, or if you're willing to share that with us live, then I'm very open to you sharing your microphone. But I'd like you to identify what's worked well and what's not worked well in terms of your role in the learning design process. Okay, have a quick think about that. We've got a few minutes now to just give you time to pause, stop, reflect, and I will be quiet as well, because that's one of the worst things is to have a presenter prattle on whilst you're trying to think about something. So get your ideas in the text chat. And I suppose it could equally be just finding a way in as well. what's worked well in terms of reaching out to people and what's not worked. So what I'm picking up from the text chat at the moment from Vicky and Mark is about using examples, and that's the approach that I used for. We had a pivot from all of our face-to-face to online. Within 3 weeks, we had to launch an online program, and to do that, I gave them my colleagues lots of examples, templates, if you will, of particular activities. But case studies work well, and there was something that I picked up earlier today about the use of examples, not just of pedagogy, but how they're implemented. So I recorded examples of how you would run a webinar, not the technical side, but how you'd actually deliver the webinar session. So just have a look at some of the other examples there. A nice coaching approach, great. Interesting point about trying to in the discussions with academics, how you try and elicit the purpose of what they're trying to doing, as in that question, that why are you doing this? What's the learning outcome? Why are the choices that you're making aligning to that learning outcome or not? Yes, Dave, what a wonderful point there about seeing what they currently do as designers, in something you've actually planned for rather than something that just happens by itself. No worries if you have to go. We will put the summaries onto the Alt website as well, the event page for this session too. Sandra, shall I hand over to you to the next slide?
Yeah, we've got a couple of slides left, and I'm aware that people are starting to drop off now. So we might encourage you to do the next bit actually online, and I've actually got something to show you on that. So hopefully you can see what I've put up, but I've also posted this on Twitter. So if you wanted to go ahead and do the next bit perhaps online, is that okay with you, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to put those hashtags in there: CPD goal, CPD plan, and CPD measure, which is success criteria. So the reason why I'm asking you to do this is that we never have these sessions where we ask people to reflect on what's been going on and what they're going to do next differently. And I think it's worth, particularly at the end of the year, to take a bit of time for yourself to capture your learning. So it could either be based on something that I've talked about today or Sandra's talked about today, or it could be something that you've seen throughout the conference today so far, but it might inspire you to set a development goal for yourself for next term, and do allow yourself time to make that goal happen. I'll put those questions onto the event page as well, but if you want to put your responses via Twitter, and then certainly tweet myself and Sandra, our hashtags are in the chat and the handles are on the slides. We'd be really interested to see what you think. Now, I would also say that this aligns very closely with the Cmo Framework. So if you are looking at particularly section 2 in Cmo, where you're using technology and you're trying to be informed by teaching and learning assessment approaches, we tend to see that people use frameworks to help them analyze their use of learning technology. So this is another reason why we've run this session today, is to get you thinking about how you can use those frameworks for your own development and for your Cmo. So thank you very much for your contributions.
Yeah, we've got some references here, and all the slides and everything will be up on the actual conference space for this when we've got everything together.
Okay.
Fabulous. Thank you, Sandra and Matt. That's fantastic. Please, a big round of applause in the chat for Sandra and Matt. So we've got a couple of minutes for questions. If anyone's got anything, please do post them in the chat. So Sandra and Matt, I have a question for you. You talked about obviously a lot of frameworks and learning design tools and templates and things. What specific ones have you used during the pandemic to respond?
Oh, I can start with that, Matt. I've been using ABC, but also I've been looking at the one that Matt and I have presented here as well, which I found really interesting.
Fantastic. Matt, have you got anything to add to that?
Yes, we use ABC for all our Future Learn courses. So at STEM Learn, we have an approach where we use the slightly adapted version of ABC, but we use the ABC as a framework. But certainly when I've been supporting, when creating the courses for the teachers that we support around the country, we have been using that very simplistic swim lane model just to get our toe into online learning, and that's gone down really well with the teachers on the course as well, the MOOCs that we've got. If you want to look on Future, and they're teaching for home learning courses for primary and secondary, you'll get to see how we've used and advised teachers using those different models. Sometimes it is about keeping it simple, and whilst I love diving into learning design and learning frameworks and using a particular model to analyze or plan something, that shouldn't necessarily be the priority for academics, particularly as we have this massive emergency pivot. But in order to move from emergency to sustained, then we are going to have to start engaging academics with these types of frameworks. But I think that happens through discussion. I'm less keen about pushing those frameworks out as training resources. I'm more interested in using those frameworks for what they should be used for, which is to stimulate those discussions between different people with expertise in a course development team.
Yeah, and one of the drivers behind our session that today is the fact that we started off with discussion in the summer and then took that onto Twitter. So we're hoping we're going to get some responses on Twitter, and we'll try and continue that discussion there.
Fantastic. Yes, I'd encourage everyone to use the hashtags that Matt and Sandra put into the chat, and hopefully, like I say, get some really good evidence around this as well. I'm a big fan of the ABC learning design myself, I must admit, and obviously your adapted version of Future Learn is fantastic. We adopted it ourselves in the NHS, I must admit. It's fantastic. Any final questions for Matt and Sandra?